This podcast is about the philosophy of sport, the philosophy of video games, the philosophy of tabletop games, because all of these involve and require fair play. They involve and require rules that need to be respected. But first and foremost, all of them are social gatherings where things happen because people are social. Then when you put different people together, different things happen. So with that in mind, we will focus on understanding the philosophy behind it, the psychology behind it, because apparently TTRPGs can also be therapeutic to some degree. And through that, we will learn how to better be a game master, but also how to better be a player. Because if you, as a game master, are a horrible, toxic player because you want everything to happen to you because you know how it works, P.S. that's how I used to be for a really hot minute, then it might just show that you've never really put yourself in the shoes of a player, or at least not enough in order to actually gain a decent opinion of it. So, hopefully you can hear me well, hopefully not too loud, hopefully not too quiet. In today's episode, this is going to be the first episode of hopefully a long-running podcast where I try to discuss what I like and what I don't like about tabletops, and perhaps in doing so give you some information as to what in my experience works best. Very basically, I want to encourage new players or already upcoming players to delve into other tabletop RPGs, not just the classics like Vampire, the Masquerade the 5th edition, or Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, or Pathfinder. I want you to explore, because I genuinely think that there is no perfect game that encapsulates there isn't even a perfect game for a specific person. I think that games themselves oftentimes are only products, like we can only stretch them so far as to what we like about them. So at some point, it's not necessarily that we get used to them or get bored of them, but we learn that mode of agency, and unless something comes up which allows us to say, okay, maybe I can play this exact same game with these rules but approach it completely differently, only then can we re-experience that game. To that extent, I want to argue throughout the series that games, especially tabletops, are not just narratives. They're not just stories that we listen to. They're not a TV series. As much as we want them to be, or as much as sometimes they seem to be, at the end of the day, the experience of playing a game makes up more of the defining characteristics than something like the actual story being told. It's more so about the plethora of choices that the player has, and that the GM, DM, whatever. I think I'm gonna refer to them as the storyteller in general, but I guess we'll see. Basically to give you all of these options and let you safely explore them in an environment of your own. Of course, there are different games for different people. With certain players that I've played with, games where combat is violent and deadly, but not necessarily frequent, is good. They really like those types of games because it incentivizes you to get ready for that combat, but it also doesn't put the focus on minuscule strategies inside the combat. But we'll talk more about that later. For now, I want you to know that this entire episode is going to be dedicated to basically understanding my position on games And because of that, I'm gonna talk briefly about tabletops as they exist, or as I've seen them exist. Because I'll admit I haven't been part of the mainstream community of tabletops, so it would be difficult for me to argue that I'm an avid fan of D&D, or that I've played a shit ton of D&D or Pathfinder in order to actually know what those games do. However, I have played enough of those games to know why I like them and why I don't like them. I've tried to keep up also with the currents and waves of like different types of games emerging and disemerging. For example, with the OSR movement, which the key leader is Morkborg, and every other game that followed Morkborg. Before we understand tabletops, we have to understand what an RPG is and how tabletop RPGs differ from any other type of media, especially any other type of game. So RPGs, role-playing games, involve the player taking over a character, basically pretending to be that character. In tabletop RPGs, I'd argue this connection that forms between a player's avatar and themselves but can be one of the strongest, because even if in an MMORPG like World of Warcraft, even Warframe to some extent, even in those games, when you get attached to your character, necessarily you get attached to your character's persona or skills or the way they act around the world. You don't support necessarily their decisions as much as you're attached to this persona you've created over the months, years, however much time you've spent on it, because that persona serves as a way to explain who you are. It's a cultural avatar of yourself, whereas other people see drawing or making a movie or creating music as a way to transpose themselves into art and become near infinite to some people who are not necessarily on the very artistic side. Especially not in our current medium, where everything is somehow transaction based. The idea of spending time, in-game time, in building an avatar shows dedication, shows the fact that you are willing to go the extra mile to make sure your character has the best gear, the best companions, the best whatever. This is basically playing the game for achieving success. And this isn't wrong by any means. However, it doesn't, I believe it does not actually equate the author, the player, with themselves completely. It doesn't let them to actually experience what that character feels and what they want to do, besides wanting to do quests for different rewards. So that's why we turn to tabletop RPGs, where you have a character sheet, you have a bunch of stats. In a game like Morkborg or any of the things that exist after it, like Cyborg, Pirateborg, and Death in Space, I think it was called. These games are much less, like, they are much looser in terms of rules, which allows your character more freedom, although there's an argument to be made there that it might actually constrict their freedom. But very basically, you have a character sheet where you have some rules. You have basic explanations of who your character is, what they can do, what they can't do. For example, if their skill and strength is 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 10, they're more likely to break their hand trying to lift a rock or a fridge or something of the sort, which is fine. Like, Character sheets give us a way to quantify real life things in numbers, which helps us immerse ourselves in the games more. Because although we have parallels that we can draw from the game to real life, we are very quickly able to acknowledge that in a tabletop, it is a game. Like, I can't go across the river because I didn't put enough points into athletics. I'm probably gonna drown. And yes, to some this might appear like, hey, so basically all I need is big number and I win. But that isn't necessarily the case, and this actually is a good segue to the other part of this discussion, which is the game master, the storyteller, the referee, the dungeon master, whatever you want to call him, or her, or them. Never tried the game with multiple game masters, like in the same time. That would be interesting. Anyway, the game master is the arbiter of any encounter that the party has, any encounter that the players choose to pursue. The game master is the person to tell them, you can do that, you can't do that, you can try to do that. So you play, if you're a player, you indulge in the world of the game master, that you, of course, you can mold as to be your own, but it is his world at the end of the day. However, very interestingly, since game masters are also oftentimes players, even if there is that recurring meme that the forever game master will always stay at the table telling stories, they are to some extent players themselves, either because they have to role play non-playable characters, NPCs, or because they have to think like an adventurer, so they're able to predict and craft ways of entering a place, of robbing a stagecoach, and so on and so forth. So the game master's skill set is that of a player, but a bit more, because a game master needs to have a compelling story, but more so than that, he needs to provide the players with what they seek, with what they want, even if those players might know it or not at the beginning. Even if you can ask them, okay, what do you want from this campaign, and they don't really know, or they give you an answer like, I want to kill a lot of goblins. The game master is responsible to be empathetic enough towards other people in order to simply look around, look at each person's character sheet, and sort of craft the story as it goes on. In future episodes, we'll probably talk more about how to craft a story, because that is also very important. But for now, having talked about each of these roles, we should talk about tables, because tables differ, of course. One party may play an adventure and go through it steamrolling, guns out, get to the top of the mountain, just destroy everything in their path, even if they have the same gear as another party, which takes their time, explores, talks to all of the NPCs, whatever. It would be wrong, if you want to be a game master, to say that either of these choices is bad, to say that either of these choices slows the game down or defeats the purpose of the game. Because as a game master, you are truly embodying the literary theory of death of the author. You are, to some degree, responsible for the world you made and for the thing that you're dropping your players into. But it's their world now, and they can change it, and they have the ultimate say in things. They decide, I want to talk to this NPC, I want to kill this NPC, I want to leave. And in this scenario, you have to understand your table very well and the dynamics at your table, because there are those stereotypes in the TTRPG community. Maybe the rules lawyer, maybe the person who's always on their phone, and even though they like coming to these activities, they're not necessarily that much into it, and so on. Understanding what your table wants and understanding who the players at your table are allows you as a game master to actually craft stories where your players will not be picking up the phone, will not be opening the rule book to say actually every other 5 minutes. Because if you know these are the types of players you're gonna have at your table, and you're okay with that, like you don't have a problem with them doing that, then you can construct a story in such a way that these things get answered. You can construct a story in such a way that you don't even have any rules that could be interpreted wrongly. Like, for example, having an ambush ready and rolling the dice beforehand. So if the rules lawyer comes up and says, hey, that's unfair, you can explain to them it's actually not I rolled for it, but it takes skill, and it more so takes expertise to know when these things come up and how to deal with them as a game master. But as a player, I think the most important thing is to be cohesive. Tables where the players don't really get along with one another often end up with players trying to get stuff. Each of them trying to get their own stuff in a limited amount of time. And this is one of the personal reasons that I don't want to run games with a lot of players. I've seen a lot of game masters online at conventions, you name it, with games that are like 4, 6, 8 players, and even they admit it gets difficult, especially during combat. But I really care about the player experience and the relationship that the player builds with their own avatar, with their own character. So I like to keep my games pretty small, 1 to 3 players, because even at 3 players I feel like sometimes stuff might get off the rails. But good thing I said this phrase, off the rails. Off the rails implies the existence of a railway, and it implies the existence of railroading, which is a common feature or a mistake, a bug or a feature, however you want to call it, of a lot of game masters' toolkits. Oftentimes, you'll find yourself trying to tell a narrative, trying to tell a story, and you'll end up with the players ruining that story because they don't know what you want. It's sort of very similar to a marriage in some regards, because you can't read your partner's mind. In tabletops, you're not allowed to, because reading the GM's mind would basically mean that you know every little lore tidbit that goes on there. But nevertheless, it's the same kind of power dynamic of the game master has information, the game master wants to transmit that information, but the players may or may not receive it, or may not want it. To that case, to that frequent scenario, I'd recommend a sit down with the players, and there are tools. For example, the Chronicler's Guide of Vampire the Requiem, a rulebook I will be linking in the description, talks a lot about how you can, as a game master, actually encourage your players to do stuff without drawing them back and pushing them and basically maneuvering them like a puppet. This can be mostly achieved through themes, through motifs. Themes being something like tonight's session is not going to be your round of the mill vampire elder who sends you to do this, kill that guy. I do not like that guy. And it can be more about smaller themes that eventually build up to these larger, let's call them meta themes. What an author like Ian Bogost would refer to as unit operations. So in these unit operations, we see sub-themes that are in of themselves their own stories. So for example, let's take this basic story of you work for the big boss. Big boss wants other big boss dead. Your job, your mission, go kill the other big boss. Of course, you can set here obstacles. It can be an entire hero's journey. You can set obstacles like there's somebody else who wants to kill the guy. Somebody has ratted on you and he knows you're coming. It's difficult to locate him because he moves about really fast, etc., etc., etc. However, what Bogost suggests in video games, but we can take it and adapt it here, is following the subtle unit operations that the players perform once they are in the game. So, for example, in this scenario, maybe the players decide, okay, we're gonna need a lot of guns. Or better yet, the players decide, okay, we're gonna need a lot of people. We need the knowledge. We need to know stuff. So one of the players goes on and contacts a journalist, starts asking questions. Another contacts a cop, goes to see some inmates, whatever. This may not be the main plot. They may find other side plots, like the cop beating his wife up, or the journalist being more so interested in your boss than the other guy. If these appear organically, or if players seem like they want to experience these things, I'd say let them, because any good story where players can exercise their agency, meaning where they can actually play and make choices, it's a game about multiple choices, where you finally don't have just a few different endings, but you have different interactions that don't necessarily have foreseeable consequences. So if one of the players talks to the cop, sees that this guy is beating his wife, maybe down the road he will go and serve some vigilante justice. Maybe he'll report him to his superiors. Maybe he'll do something about it. Maybe he won't. Nevertheless, if you notice that this player cares about this sub-theme, about this little ramification, you should embrace it and you should make it pop out more. So for example, if this specific thing is, maybe you can make it a recurring motive that cops in this place are violent, or cops in this place are crooked. And maybe one of the other players will take interest in this, but from a different perspective. They'll be like, okay, why are all of them corrupt? Why are all of them bad? Like, how are they not getting paid enough? Is it some sort of mass psychosis? Are they just bad cops? What's going on? And they may find out something different, following the same route. But that's what's important. It's important to find, as you present the main story of your big boss, the other big boss, it's important to find the line that the players want to use to get there. Because oftentimes it's not going to be very clear where the players are headed. But if you notice that these players, in this example, start following this line, caring more about the police and what the police are doing for different reasons, you might be able to trace that back back to the big boss, back to the other big boss. Because maybe you didn't know, or you hadn't written out, hey, the big boss fucks over cops, or they're in his payroll, or whatever. Maybe this evolves organically, and you find out that this road doesn't exactly lead to your mission, but it leads you to a boulevard from where you can reach the alley that goes right into the building of the big boss. So it's important to always listen to your players. It's important to always know what's going on, and it's important to have a direct line of communication with them at all times. And these are the basic steps of being a GM. Even if you're a professional that gets paid to do this, even if you're just an amateur that you just want to run a session for your friends, it's important to know what your group wants and what you want. Because I've seen tables break down because the GM wanted one thing and the players wanted another. In fact, myself, I've broken a couple of tables mostly because I saw fit to change the rules constantly. That's my pet peeve. I love homebrewing, changing rules, changing systems mid-campaign, whatever. And of course, some people are not okay with that because they want a more stable and predictable line of work and line of outcomes. So when I'm changing and shifting around the place, it becomes difficult to see causal relations. It becomes difficult to see, okay, last time I checked, A plus B equaled C. I wonder, now that the systems are changed and now that the G-Man just screwed us over, presumably, I wonder if still A plus B equals C. And even if it does, more often than not, there's a very niche explanation for why it worked. Like, it didn't work because we were lucky. So yeah, a little bit about me. Well, while we are on the topic of myself, maybe you should know what my credentials as a GM are. I've been running tabletops for the past 8 or 9 years, something of the sort. First started with I first started when I saw on Smosh Games, I think, they were running a vampire themed, a zombie themed game. And I didn't have access to the character sheets. I didn't have access to the rules. It was a mess. I ran it in a local coffee shop with the employees looking at me really fucking weirdly, because instead of a real GM screen, I had manufactured one using a piece of the cardboard pizza that comes when you get 3 stacks of pizzas. Not fun, a bit embarrassing. I was pretty young, but either way, that's where it started, and it hasn't stopped since. I've played a lot of Cyberpunk 2020, ran a lot too, had stinges, had a lot of problems with 2020 because when I was young, I read through the rulebook like crazy. I admire Mike Pondsmith. The book was amazing. Night City source book, also amazing. I actually have a physical copy of one of my favorite adventures. It's the Euro Tour for Cyberpunk 2020. Really well done, in my opinion. Very well printed, very pretty, giving you alternate endings, how to play your characters and everything. Really good. Anyway, Cyberpunk 2020 was pretty difficult for a beginner GM, mostly because there were a lot of resources, fortunately, because it was an old game. There were a lot of resources online and people willing to help. But the combat system, for example, was still pretty difficult to wrap your head around. But we made it through. I was really excited for Cyberpunk Red when it launched. Played it a bit. something felt off. Like it was better than 2020 in terms of like not having only like 5 guns that are really busted and then everything else is shit. However, it had some mechanical issues that made it pretty difficult to actually do combat. I don't know, I always found combat in 2020 much simpler. Like it usually got resolved after like 1 round, whereas in Red you had a lot more armor, a lot more bullets, a lot more health, and it made it seem a bit more like we were playing a video game rather than anything else. But while I was having my little burnout with Cyberpunk Red, I discovered Cyborg, and I ran with it. Cyborg was amazing. I played Cyborg for like 2 years nonstop, something of the sort. It was beautiful. Played it with like so many crews. In general, just Cyborg did everything Cyberpunk couldn't do, at least for me. It had quick cyberware that you didn't need to read 15 pages in order to understand. It had very good net running because you could just install apps and hack stuff and whatever. And in general, it just had good vibes, man. I'll be real. Then one of my best friends introduced me to Vampire the Masquerade. Played that for a year. V5. Played at his table. Then I started hosting my own table again on here where I moved, because I moved to a different city. Here I made like the reason why I fell in love with Vampire is because I could craft my own city in it, and it would be pretty easy because I just had to add some little vampires here and there. So I really liked Vampire for that. Then I got really upset with the V5 mechanics. I have a blog about that. I'm not going to go into detail here, but what you need to know is that the moment I launched myself upon Requiem, my beloved Requiem 2nd edition, I didn't need anything else, and it was perfect. Of course, it really wasn't. I've been on the hunt. I've played a lot of indie titles. I played Fist, Jamais Vu, Night's Black Agents, GURPS, all sorts of shit. Really fun. Like, I really like exploring and seeing what rule sets are used for what. Especially seeing third-party creators produce content that is so good for games. Like, almost if not surpassing the quality of the original producers. Anyway, so that's about my career. I also did some stints in professional game mastering. Did some start playing games. Also did some paid sessions, like one-on-one sessions. In general, I try to diversify my gaming portfolio as much as possible, to learn as much as possible, and to understand why I like certain rules and why I don't like certain rules. But back to tabletops as a whole. As a reminder, players are your lifeline as a GM. So you need to understand your players, you need to talk to your players, you need to always communicate, and you have to model the adventure after them. So you wouldn't give a social adventure to somebody who is really good at combat or who really enjoys combat. And this sounds very, very reductionist. Yeah, but this sounds very reductionist. We are not going to split the types of play only into social, combat, and exploratory, because that's not exactly how it works in real life or in games. However, for example, I had a table that was really good at problem solving. Not necessarily puzzles as much as they had the mental capacity to just sit hours on end, resolve a mystery, or not even resolve a mystery, but get shit done. Like, I'd give them an insane objective, like, yeah, you see Arasaka Tower, I'm not gonna ask you to blow it up, just I need a nuclear bomb for it. And they would scramble for sessions on end to get that. And they were very competent in that department. However, when you put them in a different scenario where it was more about mingling with when you put them in a different scenario, like mingling with crowds, not really knowing what they're up against, basically trying to find information, scouring for information, but not knowing where it's supposed to lead, they automatically became not necessarily less good of a player. God forbid, if you're a good player, you're a good player. But it was obviously not their area of expertise, and they didn't enjoy it as much. And since we are playing games to enjoy ourselves, and if the players don't enjoy themselves, then they will inadvertently produce less fun content for the game master to attack or to play around with. I, of course, also understood that those sessions were not necessarily off limits, but were best kept as intermediaries. This is... you should take this with a grain of salt, because players change. We are people. People change. And players can have their mood shift from angry to sad to upset to happy during the session or before the session or in the same day. So a player who comes to the session after having just broken out with it, and a player who comes to the session after just having had a fight with his girlfriend is most likely not going to have the same sort of enthusiasm as somebody who came here after just eating the biggest burger at McDonald's and having the best day of his life. So even if we can place players in certain categories, we should be aware of the fact that these categories can shift and they can change, and they vary depending on one's mood. And in the same sense, if a GM's mood is different, then certain behavior might alter in order to appease the GM or in order to frustrate the GM further. Since it is a social encounter, like playing a tabletop is much more of a social encounter than a MMORPG or a video game an online video game like CS, where you just open the voice chat to tell your team where to go. They don't listen to you. One of them farts with the mic open, then the other team starts cheating, and it becomes a cesspool of toxicity. Tabletops, fortunately, aren't really prone to that. Of course, you can have bad players, bad actors who try to fuck it up, or just generally they have a certain vision of how things should be. They try to enforce it onto you and onto the world. But overall, that isn't the case, and that shouldn't be the case for tabletops. So, that is it for tonight's episode. See you again some other time. Stay safe, stay frosty, and if you want your opinion, and if you want my opinion of Dungeons and Dragons, you will have to pay extra for that, because it's a wound I have to scrape in order to talk about that, which segues very nicely into the fact that I have a Patreon. My Patreon is patreon.com/gman tabletops, I think. If you want to donate, support me monthly, or buy one-on-one sessions, either coaching sessions or GM player sessions, you can contact me there. I'll be more than happy to respond. The more people subscribe to my Patreon, especially paid, the more I am able to produce these videos on a constant basis. However, I do intend to keep doing this. I do intend to keep doing this constantly to some degree, but depending on how much money I have, I might not do it as frequently since jobs exist. But I'd like to do it. I like doing it. I think I can bring something good to the community. And yeah, that's about it. Have a nice day.